Welcome back. On Monday, I left Rachel standing in the corridor outside the boardroom with a presentation she half believed and an opening line that apologised for existing. And I left you with a question. Today, I'm coming back with the answer, the actual neurological, this is actually what was happening inside Rachel's brain version. Hello, I'm Caroline Esterson, and this is Little Moves, Big Careers, helping women in corporate leadership who are constantly second-guessing themselves to build the daily habits that compound into unshakable confidence. Yep, that's you. So here's what you're getting today. First, you're going to find out exactly what happens to your brain when critical feedback lands at the worst possible moment, and why what Rachel did on that train was biology, not weakness, and there really is a difference between the two. Secondly, you're going to discover why the most capable women are the most vulnerable to exactly this, not in spite of their ability, but because of it. That one might sting a little, but hopefully in the best possible way. And 3, you're going to leave this episode with 3 specific moves for the next time you're standing in a corridor in shoes that hurt, about to walk into a room that needs you at your full size. Right, let's go back to Rachel and to what was actually going on. We're going to talk about the amygdala hijack and why 7:51 in the morning was the absolute worst time for Dominic to be sending that email. So let's start with that neuroscience. And I promise this is going to feel immediately uncomfortably familiar. Have you ever received critical feedback at a high stakes moment? Because you know what? When we receive that feedback, especially unexpected critical feedback, and especially before a high stakes event, our brain automatically processes it as a threat, not a metaphorical threat, an actual neurological, oh my God, something dangerous is happening threat. So let me tell you about the science. The amygdala is our brain's threat detection center, and it activates and floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline. This is exactly the same system that evolved to protect us from predators. It doesn't distinguish, frankly, between a lion and an email from your manager. What neuroscientists call the amygdala hijack means the rational, creative, strategic prefrontal cortex, the part that prepared Rachel's presentation for 3 weeks, gets partially offline fast. And this is why Rachel ended up rewriting slides that she'd spent 3 weeks on in the space of a short commute. It wasn't considered an editorial decision. It was her threat response. Her brain was trying to make the danger go away. That line that Dominic said, something to reflect on, that was the trigger. Not because Dominic was necessarily wrong, but because those words in that moment activated Rachel's threat system before her rational brain had the chance to evaluate them. Now, here's the thing that I really want you to understand. The amygdala hijack happens to everyone, men, women, senior leaders, new starters even. Everyone's threat system fires when critical feedback arrives at the wrong moment. But it doesn't hit everyone equally. For capable women in professional environments, it hits harder, faster, and with more lasting damage. And there are 3 specific research reasons why this happens. And I want to name all 3 of them, because understanding this is the difference between thinking I'm weak and thinking I'm operating in a specific set of conditions that make this more likely. Those are not the same thought. Firstly, the competence trap. Here's something that will feel immediately uncomfortably familiar. The more capable you are, the more the threat response has to work with. Psychologist Brené Brown's work on vulnerability and high achievement consistently shows that the most capable, most conscientious people carry the highest fear of being found out. Not the least capable, the most, because they have the most invested. They've worked harder to get into the room. They're more aware of what's at stake. And they've often internalized, whether consciously or not, the message that one visible mistake will confirm what some people might already suspect. So when Dom's email arrived, Rachel's threat system doesn't just fire, it fires with more fuel than the man sitting next to her on the train, because she's given it more to work with. Capability doesn't protect you from the amygdala hijack. In this specific way, it makes you more vulnerable to it. Secondly, the socialization layer. The second reason is older than Rachel's career, older than Dom's email, and older probably than the organization you're working in. Decades of developmental psychology research, including landmark work by Carol Gilligan and Jean Baker Miller, shows that girls are disproportionately socialized from childhood to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, and to prioritize relationships over self-assertion. This isn't a character flaw. It is a deeply grooved neural pathway built over years of feedback, explicit and implicit, about what behavior is rewarded and what carries a social cost. By the time Rachel's standing on that train, she's been practicing the appease and accommodate response for approximately 25 years. The email from Dom doesn't create that response. It simply activates a pathway that has been there since she was actually Isla's age. When she picks up her pen and the presentation starts softening those recommendations, she's not making a rational professional judgment. She's running a program that was written a very long time ago. And thirdly, the credibility tax. And this one is the hardest to hear, but actually it is the most important. Victoria Brescoll's research at Yale found that women who speak assertively and confidently in professional settings are consistently rated as less competent and less likable than men who say exactly the same things in exactly the same way. Women in leadership who express strong opinions are penalized for it in a way that male counterparts simply aren't. Rachel's brain, drawing on her accumulated experience of professional life, knows this. Not consciously, but somewhere in the data of her career, she's learned that confidence carries a social cost for her, that it just doesn't carry for Dom. So when her threat system fires, it fires with an extra calculation running underneath it. Even if I push back, even if I go with the strong version, it might cost me anyway. That's a rational response to documented evidence. The system is not neutral. It never has been. So when I say Rachel's response on the train wasn't weakness, I mean precisely that. Her threat system fired harder because she is capable and has more invested. It activated a decades-old appeasement response she didn't choose, and she didn't build it. And it did so in a professional environment that has been, whether anyone intended it or not, giving her contradictory signals about the cost of confidence her entire career. That's biology, amplified by socialization and amplified again by a system. And all of these three things are workable, which is exactly what we're going to talk about next. And here's the second thing that was happening inside Rachel's brain on that train. The feedback didn't just activate a threat response, it activated a belief that she was already carrying. Psychologist Dr. Valerie Young's research on imposter syndrome identified a specific pattern that she calls feeling like a fraud, the persistent, often secret fear that you're not as capable as others believe you to be, and that at some point, someone's going to notice. For women in early leadership, this pattern is disproportionately common, and critically, it doesn't require the feedback to be harsh. Even neutral or well-intentioned developmental feedback can activate the imposter spiral if it lands on a pre-existing belief that you don't quite belong where you're supposed to be. Rachel wasn't just receiving feedback about her slides. She was receiving confirmation of something that she was already half afraid was true. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just not quite ready yet. That thought didn't come from Dominic's email. It came from Rachel, came from Rachel's head. The email just gave it permission to get loud. So let's just dig a little bit deeper now. Why did Rachel change the slides instead of defending them? So Rachel's in that situation. Her threat system has been activated. Her imposter belief has been confirmed. And then she does something very specific. She complies. She rewrites, she softens, she deletes the recommendation that she believed in. This is not people pleasing. It's actually a survival response, and it has a name. Trauma therapist Pete Walker identified 4 stress responses: fight, flight, freeze, and here's the one you want to remember: fawn. The tendency to appease, accommodate, and comply in response to perceived threat. Fawning is particularly common in women who've been socialized to prioritize relationships and avoid conflict. It feels like being responsive and professional. In fact, it looks like being responsive and professional. But underneath, when you really evaluate it, it is the action of self-erasing, simply to keep the peace. Rachel told herself she was being responsive, that she was showing that she could take feedback. But what she was actually doing was making herself smaller before she walked into a room that needed her at her full size. So what could Rachel have done differently instead? Now, you know what? I'm not here to tell you that Dominic's feedback was wrong. It might have had merit, because feedback often does, even when the timing is appalling. The thing is, Rachel didn't ask, did she? So let's look at what excellence would have looked like in that corridor. And none of it really requires Rachel to be braver, tougher, more resilient, or fundamentally different to who she is. It requires one small move. Well, actually, 3 small moves, each one tiny. Little move number 1. Actually name what's happening, not out loud, not to Dom, just internally in your head. Something like, okay, I've just received some critical feedback 90 minutes before a high stakes presentation. My threat system has been activated. Whew, this is normal. This doesn't mean the feedback is correct or that my presentation is wrong. The naming of an emotional state is what psychologists call effect labeling. It reduces the amygdala activation. A 2007 UCLA study led by Matthew Lieberman found that putting feelings into words literally quiets the threat response. The simple act of thinking, I am feeling threatened right now, gives the prefrontal cortex enough runway to come back online. Rachel doesn't need to feel calm. She needs to name that she isn't. That's the move. And then building on that, let's look at little move number 2. Separate the signal from the noise. Let's be clear. Not all feedback is equal, and not all feedback is properly timed. Excellence looks like being able to ask, is there something useful here? And can I park the rest until after 2:00? In Rachel's case, maybe the data section genuinely could have been cleaner. That might have been worth a small adjustment. But your delivery style works against you in rooms like this in the morning of the presentation day. That's not really actionable feedback, is it? It's, a hand grenade. It's the mic drop moment. And excellence looks like recognizing that difference. So let's go and look at Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset now, because this is often cited in terms of being open to all feedback. But Dweck herself is clear. A growth mindset doesn't mean accepting every piece of feedback uncritically. It means being able to evaluate what's useful, what's accurate, and what's timed so badly it belongs in a completely different conversation. Rachel can schedule a conversation with Dominic about delivery style after the presentation, when she has the cognitive capacity to engage with it properly. That isn't avoidance. That is good feedback hygiene. And it is a little move. And then finally, little move 3. You need to go back to the version of yourself that prepared for this. This is the one that I most want Rachel to take into that corridor, don't you? The woman who stood in her dressing gown at 6:00 on a Saturday morning running slides in her head. That woman knew what she was talking about. That woman had researched her recommendations. And that woman had an opening line that asked the room to think differently. That woman didn't disappear on the 8:17 to Victoria. She got scared, and that's not the same thing. Self-continuity research, particularly work by psychologist Ethan Cross on self-distancing, shows that briefly stepping outside of your immediate emotional state and accessing a more stable sense of self can dramatically improve performance under pressure. Cross calls this temporal self-appraisal, reminding yourself of a version of you that was competent, prepared, and clear. And it takes seconds, and it works. And it looks like this, as standing in that corridor at 1:58 p.m. The little move is just talking to yourself, saying things like, I prepared this. I know this. I believe in that recommendation. I'm going in with the version of this that I built, not the version that I dismantled under pressure. And then she puts the phone away and she walks confidently in with her head held high. So before we end up today, I want to zoom out for a moment because you know what? Rachel's train story is not a one-off bad morning. It's a pattern, the threat response, the imposter spiral, the form, the self-erasure disguised as responsiveness. These are learned responses to the environments that have communicated that you need to be a little more careful, a little more accommodating, and a little less sure of yourself than your instincts tell you to be. And you can't fix that with a big leap. You can't decide one morning to stop being triggered by feedback, to stop doubting yourself, to stop making yourself smaller. The brain doesn't work like that. What you can do is build the little moves, the naming, the separating, the returning to yourself. Practiced enough times in small enough moments that when you're standing outside in the corridor at 1:58, they're already there for you. They're your foundation. They're already part of how you work. And that's what this show is about. It's not about transformation. It's about accumulation of those little moves made consistently until it compounds into something that looks from the outside like a different woman entirely. But it's not a different woman. It's the same woman, just finally operating at the size she was always supposed to be, that you were always supposed to be. So on Friday, the song I've chosen is one that I think captures exactly where Rachel needed to be when she walked into that room. And I've also got 3 quick-fire moves, small enough to do in the corridor, but powerful enough to change what happens next. But before Friday, one question for you to sit with. Where in your working life are you currently rewriting your own slides? Not literally, but where are you making yourself smaller, softening something you believe in, or deleting a recommendation because someone else's voice got louder than your own? Notice it. That's all. Just notice it. Thank you for lending me your ears so far this week. If you know a woman that would appreciate these little moves, then please forward this episode to them. I'm Caroline Esterson. This is Little Moves, Big Careers. See you Friday. And remember, make your move, even if it's tiny, especially if it's tiny.